So good evening, everyone. I'll turn the microphone on, see if that helps at all. Can you hear me in here?
No.
Not so much?
I can't hear you at all.
It might be better that way. Do I need to turn the volume up, or is it okay?
Fine.
It's okay. Okay, good. If you didn't yet get a packet, please come take a source materials packet and then one of each of the handouts. What a great turnout. I hope you all come back.
It's up to you.
Right, it's up to me. It's all on me. No pressure. No pressure.
We hope you come back too.
Thank you. So I'm really excited to be able to do another session of the iEngage program. I hope all of you received the email that Noah sent out with the materials and the sign up. I think most of you did. If you didn't get an email from us with the with the information about the class, please raise your hand. Okay, good. That worked. Okay, great. What we're going to do tonight is really an introduction to our 8 weeks or so of study together. We're going to talk about what we're going to talk about, which is not always that much fun, but it's necessary in order for us to start to build the trust and the understanding and the language with each other so that we can have these deep values-based conversations and learn from each other. So I haven't taught this material before. I'm familiar with it all, and I've been preparing for it for a long time, but it may also take me a little while to get the hang of it, so we'll learn that together. What I'd like to do, and I assume that you sat at tables where you already know everybody at your table, right? Okay, so that's going to have to change in the future. But what I'd like to do right now, just to start with, is it's okay, you can come in, Audrey, it's okay. Our high school kids are in the kitchen learning how to keep kosher with Ella Dressner, and they're making apple pie and learning about kashrut at the same time. So, will you share your pies with us? That was it. I guess what I'd like to do is I want to start with why it was important for me to have this course here, and then I want you to share amongst your table, as you introduce yourselves to each other, why it was important for you, why you decided to come out on a Tuesday night over the course of 2 months to have this conversation. And I guess my interest in this goes all the way back to when I was a Jewish teen and took my first trip to Israel. When it was my sister's bat mitzvah, so I was 11 years old. And in our family, the custom was you have your bar or bat mitzvah in the synagogue, and then instead of having a party, we go to Israel. And then you get to pick a country in Europe that you go to for a week, and you go to Israel for 3 weeks. And this is back in the late 70s, early 80s. And I remember going to Israel at the time. My sister has red hair. I don't have any hair, but if I did, it wouldn't be red. And I remember going to Israel at the time, we were in the Arab Shuk in the old city. And I remember one of the Arab merchants, offered my dad 250 camels for my sister. Which I said, we'll take 200. And they had the whole bartering thing and back and forth, and there was laughing, and tea was exchanged, and there was this camaraderie, and everywhere we went, there were Jews and there were Arabs walking amongst the streets of Jerusalem. And though there was still terrorism and there was the PLO and all of this, it was coexistence. And again, this is the mid to late 1970s. I guess later 1970s. And then I went back to Israel for my bar mitzvah in 1983. And it was still pretty much the same, but we had already had the Lebanon War. And the tensions were higher, and there was discussion about whether you don't go into the shuk at this time, and you don't go into the Arab quarters of the old city at this point. And then I went back to Israel again and again, and then lived there for a year in my first year of rabbinical school, and lived in Jerusalem for an entire year, and this is 1994, and there were no Arabs on the streets. And you didn't see Arabs wearing keffiyehs, and there was a concern that every package had to be examined, and that there was a terrorist attack at the restaurant that I had just eaten in 20 minutes before, and I heard the gunshots and the explosions of the hand grenades as I was walking home from that. And there was tension in the air, the Intifada had taken place, but this was also around the time that the Oslo Accords were taking place, and there was hope. And then subsequent visits to Israel since then, more and more of a division and a separation, more and more of a focus. You guys can come out if you need to come out, it's okay. The future of the Jewish people right here, everyone. There you go. You're all taking a pie home? Did you make one for the rabbi? More and more concern, more and more, let's just wait till the noise ends. Thank you, Rufina. That's okay. So there's coffee and I think hot water for tea. And everyone, this is Ella Dreschner. Ella is iKosher? iKosher Bake, and she's been teaching kashrut to our high school kids. Thank you, Ella. And if you could just close the door on your way, that'd be great. Thank you. So every time I went back to Israel, the divisions got more and more extreme. The dialogue became less and less. The blame became more and more. And then I noticed that within the Jewish people, it wasn't just Israelis and Palestinians not getting along, but then in and amongst the Jewish people, the blame game was going on as for, who wanted peace more, or who wanted separation more, or the arguments over the territories and the settlements and whether that had created this conflict or not. And then something really dramatic happened, which is why we're having this course and why we've had it over the last couple of years. We stopped talking about it. We used to debate it all the time, and then we stopped talking about it because to debate it or to talk about it was to create a divide within the community and to tear apart the Jewish community, so it was better just not to talk about it at all. And all of a sudden I went from where Israel was the thing that united us as a Jewish community to Israel was the thing that if we talked about it, it would divide us. So among the many things you can't talk about in synagogue, Israel was now on the list. And the reason we have the Hartman iEngage program here is because the Hartman program, and hopefully you've read a little bit about it in the introductory materials, comes from the premise that we have to talk about these things. We have to talk about it not from a political perspective, but from a values perspective. You're going to hear the word values a lot tonight and in the subsequent classes. Not to change each other's political opinion. If you leave this class and your political opinion is exactly the same, that is totally fine. But it would be a shame if you left this class and your understanding of where the other person's opinion is coming from is not more informed. The goal is not to change you into left-wingers or right-wingers or peaceniks or hawks or doves or whatever it is. It's to expand our knowledge of everybody's narrative and the values from which they make their position known. And my concern has always been is that when we don't talk about things, that's when they fester. If you remember the Woody Allen movie in Annie Hall, where they're sitting around the table and they're talking about she has cancer, right? They whisper cancer, and so if we whisper it, it doesn't exist. Well, there is a massive question amongst the Jewish people about how we go forward as a nation and as a people. And as we're having that question, that same question is taking place in other circles, in Palestinian circles, in European circles, in North American circles. And it would be a tragedy if we just stopped talking about it. So that's why I wanted to have this class. And when Hartman came out with, and I refer to Hartman as the Institute, but here we're really talking about, it's more than just the person, but that you should know the Institute's named after named after Sholom Hartman, who was the founder of the Hartman Institute. And his son, Daniel Hartman, who you saw in the video that you watched, is now the director of the program. David Hartman died just a few years ago. Oliver Sholom, yes?
Mentioning video and materials and background, and that I got a page and a half. Is that the book that all of
Right, and there was a link to a video.
Oh.
An introductory video in that email. Did you all see that YouTube link?
No, that's not
It's 15 minutes, and truthfully, if you didn't catch that one, it's not the end of the world. Because it was in a second email?
It has a list of everybody with their names.
Oh, no, I didn't get that.
Okay.
So I think maybe.
All right, I'm going to go over the materials that you're supposed to get going forward, and all the links are in the course outline, so you'll have them already. So when I refer to Hartman, I'm speaking about the institution, which has really become the think tank of sort of modern Jewish thought about Israel. It's a centrist institution, a religious institution. Daniel Hartman is an Orthodox rabbi, but it's a values-based institution, so in that sense, it's pluralistic. It's not halachic in its approach, where it's Jewish law, and it's not reform or conservative in its in its methodology. It's really for everybody, though largely the people that study there are Reform Jews, conservative Jews, and modern Orthodox Jews. And one day, God willing, we'll bring a Hartman program here. He speaks in Seattle from time to time, and one day we'll bring him here to speak. So anyhow, I wanted to have this class, and I was so excited when they changed, or they added this third unit on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because I feel that, and as we saw just with the UN resolution just a few weeks ago, that's in large part where the lack of dialogue is today, or the fighting amongst Jews in the dialogue is today. So that's what I wanted to have. I wanted to make sure we kept talking about it. But I think it would be interesting for you to share with each other briefly, because there's 45 of you. And so we'll just do it around your table. And by the way, when you're seated in your tables, this is called chevruta. You guys are going to have to go find a friend. When you're seated around tables, this is called chevruta. And chevruta study comes from the yeshiva days. In Judaism, you're not supposed to study alone. In fact, it says in Pirkei Avot in the Mishnah, when two people sit together and study Torah, the Shekhinah, the divine presence of God, studies with them. So when you sit with 4, 6, 8 people and you study Torah, God is present also. And how is that so? Because you learn from each other, not just from the text. And we're going to talk in a moment about how we learn from each other. But right now, I'd like you to take just a minute or so each. So really, if you take a minute, there's 8 at your table, this is going to take us 10 minutes. So take a minute or so each, introduce yourself, and why was it important for you to sign up for this course? Go ahead and do that. And guys, you need to go find a table, okay? Or if you feel your table's a little large, some can go join the table in the corner. You really shouldn't have more than 8 people at your table. Okay. So let's come back together, everyone. So we're going to do 3 more things in the hour or so that we have. I want to go over a little bit of housekeeping. Now that you know who you're at the table with, I want to talk about how we're going to go. And then I have a discussion question for us. And then I'm just going to share some final thoughts. So to start with the housekeeping, just to get the boring stuff out of the way first, the materials for this course are as follows. You should all have it's spiral bound, my copy's not, the iEngage materials packet. We will email you a PDF of the reading each week also, but this is the printed material. You should bring this with you to our sessions each week, because we'll be studying from this. Inside each of these packets, if you turn to page number 3, for example, which is, 10 pages in, there's the primary source material, which is usually biblical or Talmudic, and then there's background readings. These are not copied for you, these aren't in any of your materials, but there is a URL, a web link. These are optional readings. If you read all of these, you would far and away know more about the subject than I do, which is totally fine. Many of you know much more about things than I do anyways. But I do encourage you, if you have the time, to read a few or a couple, one of the background readings, in addition to viewing the video. So, just to be clear, the source materials we do together in class, you don't have to read those. The background readings you could read in preparation for the class, and all of that is actually secondary to the video lecture that you should view in advance of each class. So on your course handout, your outline, that hopefully you all received via email, and if you didn't, please email me or Noah and we'll send it to you. The first page explained what iEngage was, and the second page was your syllabus. And in that syllabus is a YouTube link for the video for each class. The goal is to watch the video before the class. So for next week, you'll watch the video for Unit 1, the current discourse. That's on page 2 of your course syllabus. Any questions about that? After watching the video, you could then read the supplementary readings. And in our class, our Chavruta work, our discussion, I'll begin usually with a little introductory lecture, and then we're going to study these texts together in Chavruta, and sometimes we'll do them in a larger group conversation. That was that. Also, in the original sign-up, there was a link to sign up to, I think it's called signup.com, where you could bring snacks. We've discovered over the last course of doing this that people like to eat and learn. Jews and food, who would have thought? I'm still waiting for the omelet bar in all of my years of adult ed. It's never shown up. But I invite you and encourage you to sign up to bring snacks. This is lovely and this is totally fine, just fruit and a cookie here and there, whatever it is. We'll always have coffee and tea and water. Some ground rules just for our discussion in general, and then I want to look at the blue sheet with you together. This is going to be Jewish. So we're going to argue, but we aren't always going to agree. And that is actually how it should be. If we think about what we know from the Passover Seder or the Talmud, your Passover Seder or my Passover Seder, learning is found through conflict. That's, you can't make an omelet without breaking eggs. You can't form an opinion without, rubbing up against opinions that are not your own. It helps extremes are good. They help us figure out where we fit within the parameters of things. That said, it needs to be values-based, and the goal here is not to change somebody's opinion or position, but to better clarify where yours is coming from. Not so that they will adopt yours, but just so that we understand the values upon which your opinion is. So if I can share Irv just for a moment, I was sitting over at this table and Irv was talking about the right of return and a struggle that he's having, an intellectual struggle about how that fits in the knowledge of the Jewish right of return to Israel, and also that there are Palestinians that have never known another country other than Israel, but are not citizens of that country now. There's a value at play there, and what we're trying to get to is what's the value, and if we can, we'll identify the Jewish value that is anchoring that internal conflict, because that internal conflict is actually a geopolitical conflict as well. And so let's agree to talk like Jews. Which doesn't mean we talk over each other, but rather that the person who disagrees with me is not my enemy. The person who disagrees with me is my teacher. That's how I learn. By understanding, and I gave you an article about this, which we're not reading tonight, but Tal Becker, who's really a wonderful scholar, and you'll hear him in some of the Hartman lectures, has this wonderful article, Please Misunderstand Me. And it's in our act of being understood and misunderstood and wanting your misunderstanding of me to be why you don't agree with me. Because if you understood me, then of course you would agree. But we want you to misunderstand. He explains it better in his article, but it sort of fills in that idea that the person that is arguing with you is not your enemy, they're your teacher. They're very, very helpful to you. So the goals of the iEngage program is to understand why. To understand our why, and to some extent to understand the historical why. But this is not a history course. It's a values course. So some of the history is almost irrelevant because we deal with present day, and it's where we are now. To some extent, where we got there will come in, but it's really about where do we go from here forward. It's not politics, it's not history, it's values-based. So just to turn your attention to this blue sheet. I did this in our last iEngage program as well. When we talk about a covenant, we talk about a brit, a sacred contract between God and the Jewish people. This needs to be the brit that we have with each other. And I'm sorry to do all of this preface about not arguing and yelling with each other, but it's important that we model this type of discourse so that when you have these conversations around your Seder table or elsewhere in your lives, in the campuses or whatever it is, that you can share this part of it as well. So our brit today is based on an adoption, or an adaptation I should say, of the Touchstones created by Parker Palmer and the Center for Courage and Renewal. Touchstones helps us create an ethical foundation in order to speak honestly and courageously with one another. And so I'd like to just read through this with you and get your acceptance of this as we will go forward. So number one, presume and extend a welcome. I tried to greet everybody as they came in the door. Please do that for each other. Just because you sat at this table, it's like when I take Israel trips on a bus and they sit in their seat, and because they sat in that seat on the way back from the airport, that's their seat for the entire trip. It's on you to welcome and greet and invite other people to the table. It's not easy to invite yourself into a table. Be the host. Welcome people to come sit with you. If there's somebody that's sitting alone, invite them to your table. Move around. Couples should split up. Not forever, just for this evening. I tell my wedding couples, you should never stop dating. You should just stop dating other people. Be present as fully as possible. Cell phones and all of those things that distract us, try to be present here, especially when somebody else is talking. Don't be looking through your pages and reading ahead to think about what you're going to say. Listen to what they're saying. Don't be preparing to rebuttal. Speak your truth in ways that respect other people's truth. All right? There's no shoulds, and you must, and you have tos, but rather respecting where that people are coming from their own place of truth, and to respect it. And again, the goal here is not to change their mind. If anything, it's to change yours, to inform your mind. No fixing, no saving, no advising, no correcting another person. What you've got wrong is this, what you should be doing is that. Trust and learn from silence. Notice what stirs you during silence. There are no dumb questions, and all questions are welcome. I hope that you feel that not only around your table, but in the larger group as well. And I know that it doesn't always feel that way. But please, I, for one, don't know everything at all. And I learn from your questions as well. So if I don't have an answer, that will send me to my own studies to find it. So please ask. When the going gets rough, turn to wonder. If you feel judgmental or defensive, ask yourself, I wonder what brought her to this belief. I wonder what he's feeling right now. This is the core of empathy. So if you can't understand why somebody would want to give back land that God gave us in the Bible, but yet they do, try to put yourself in their shoes to understand or see the world through their eyes. And if you can't do it, that is your challenge to overcome. Because there's a reason why they think the way that they think. Learn to respond to others with honest and open questions instead of counsel or correction. What is offered in this seminar is by invitation, not demand. This is not a share or die event. In Chevruta, when we're working on a text, it would be wonderful if everybody participated. But if for that text or that moment you want to just be a passenger and a fly on the wall, that's fine. But if you're all flies on the wall, then nobody's going to learn. So please also participate when you can. Observe deep confidentiality. It would be very unfortunate if we left from this place and what people shared in terms of their values, their opinions, their feelings, ended up on Facebook or were the talk of conversation the next day and wherever the gathering was. Do you know what so-and-so said? I'm in a class with them. You can certainly report, I'm in a class, and some people around the table felt this, and some people around the table felt that. Please do not attach that to names. Yes?
Can we attach your name?
You can attach my name to anything you like.
Whether you said it or not.
Whether I said it or not. Plenty of people do. Know that the seeds planted here can keep growing and supporting you in this larger endeavor for Israel engagement. I'm going to say this a number of times, and you heard Danielle Hartman say it on the video if you watched it. We are not going to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in this room. This is not a meeting of Netanyahu's cabinet, where what we discuss and then vote upon will be the new peace accord. But what we do here will form the foundation for that larger conversation of Israel engagement. That 45 or so people could sit in a room, Jews nonetheless, and talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict from different perspectives is, I think, a seed for larger conversations or other conversations that can take place in our broader community. So I think that what we're doing here is modeling for our community, and that's a really wonderful thing. Okay, so I hope that we can all agree to that contract, that covenant. So I want to ask you a couple of questions to discuss in your chavruta now. What are some of the essential things that are causing our discourse on Israel in general, and the Palestinian-Israeli conflict in particular, to become so toxic? Why is it so hard to talk about it? What do you think the nature of that conversation is? So I'm going to start with those two questions, which is really one. Why has the conversation become so hard? Why is it so fraught with conflict and so toxic? So third rail, we better not touch it. If that's been your experience, and if it hasn't, please share the other. Go ahead and discuss around your table. Why is this so hard to talk about? That's for each of you. So coming back together, I know you could talk all night, but it's not Seder, and we do have to end at a certain time. I'm wondering if anybody from amongst our table, since all of your conversation has been very localized, if anyone at any of the tables would like to share just in broad terms any of the discussion that you just had around your table, just to summarize in a minute or so some of the issues that you feel were separating diaspora Jewry from Israel Jewry, or why this is such a tricky topic to talk about in general. Anybody hear anything at your table that was particularly enlightening or worthy of sharing with the rest of the room? Not to set such a high standard. Can anybody share with us? Yeah.
So, we struggle with a lot of these things. One of the issues is the difference between religion and religion and and nationality, and what does it really mean to be a Jew? And if you are a Jew, just because you're a Jew, do you have a right to participate in a debate about this issue? That was, you were getting called.
That's when it got interesting.
Pay attention.
We talked about that.
Thank you, Evelyn. Anyone else? Yes.
We talked about a number of things, but one of the topics we talked about with regard to the second question was the ascendancy of the ultra-Orthodox in Israel, and the fact that many of us in the diaspora are of a more liberal brand of Judaism, be it conservative, reform, reconstructionist, etc., and feeling like that whole sort of super orthodoxy is alien to us. And because it's becoming more and more prominent, it's like, is this the Israel that we knew and loved?
Right. I just want to tack on to that as something that I felt as I was thinking about this course and went back to my own sort of growing up with Israel, which is that Israel used to be my grandparents, right? It was my grandfather from Eastern Europe who now lived in Israel. He didn't, but I could see my grandparents in Israel. They all looked like Ben Gurion or Menachem Begin. My grandfather looked a lot like Menachem Begin. Israel doesn't look like that anymore. Israel is now Middle Eastern. Israelis are their own cultural tranche. There is an Israeli. It's not a European Jew that lives in Israel that has brought Ashkenazic European culture to Israel. It's uniquely its own. If you listen to modern Israeli music, if you eat Israeli food, it's taken on the sounds and the senses and the flavors of the region that it is in. And so that has had its own bifurcation effect on the Jewish world. We used to say, okay, there's Orthodox Jews and there's Reform Jews. There's now Israeli Jews, which again is its own thing outside of the realm of religious practice. Anybody else have something to share from your groups? Yes, Marie.
it's not our kids that are on the line. They're the ones that, you know, have a bigger stake than we do. So it's easy for us to make a judgment, but it's harder to.
Right. Proximity. Yes?
One of the things we said at our table in terms of why are the discussions difficult is because of our intense feeling about Israel. And that, you know, it's easier to talk rationally and not get emotional about what's going on in some other part of the world. But to talk about our differences of opinion about Israel, we felt more personal about it, and that made it more difficult.
Thank you. Evelyn?
Just one other thing that came up was that even though we may be confused about how little we know about the Israeli perspective on the Israeli-Palestinian issues, we really don't know anything about the Palestinian side. So that's really lacking. It's hard to figure out how to have a discussion when you only have one side of the debate.
Right. Which is a wonderful segue into the last little bit of this, unless there was another comment. Yes, Marcus. Yeah.
Because, I mean, I started things off by just saying I think things have become so entrenched, and I think, as you pointed out over here, that there is the immediacy that just speaking Israel is different from the UK or the US. So, but it's become so complicated and so complex, and we don't understand Arab Muslims or Muslims, Sunni, Shiite, their own difficulties, which of course impact Israel. How could they not? So it's become so complicated that people, it's like the Georgian knife, and I said, you know, and Alexander's going to cut through the whole thing because it's never going to get unraveled.
Right. So on that point, and Evelyn's as well, I invite you to read, when you go home, the what do they call this, goldenrod? That's what they called it when I was in school. The article by Tal Becker, Please Misunderstand Me. Because what's inherent in Marcus and Evelyn, what you're saying is that if we only understood, then we could solve it. Maybe we're not misunderstanding. Maybe that's not what you're saying exactly. But maybe it's not only about knowledge of the other narrative, but even knowing their narrative, we might still come to the same conclusion that, you know, this land is our land, or whatever it is. So I invite you to look closely at that article. I want to go over five points with you that sort of fill in the goals for our course of study together. 5 and a little bit extra. So first of all, we want to complexify, I'm making that word up, we want to complexify the thinking on this issue. The goal of iEngage is to expand our horizons and drill deeper down. The interviews that you'll watch in the videos are meant to drill down to allow other perspectives to enter the conversation. If, in watching it, you are filtering, I agree, that's part of what I think, and that's not part of what I think, and so then you dismiss the stuff that's not already part of your thinking, you're not going to get the benefit of the videos. You need to create a bucket in your mind. Oh, that's a thought that is not mine. That's an opinion that I don't have, but I want to hold on to that so that I can understand the values from which that opinion is coming from. If we don't talk about Israel, it will be irrelevant. But if the only way we talk about Israel is to hurt ourselves in doing it because it leads to conflict and discord, then we won't talk about it at all. And it's that catch-22 of the whole thing that is why we're doing this tonight. So, and one other point, and then I'll get to my 5 goals. This is not about me or my position. I sat in on some of your tables, and at different times you turned to me and was like, and so, Rabbi. This isn't about my position, and it really actually shouldn't even be about your position. It's about a spectrum of ideas. We want to come out of this more complex, more complicated, hopefully more informed, less sure of ourselves. So, 5 goals for us. The goal of Israel iEngage in general is to ensure that we talk with each other about Israel and issues that we profoundly disagree with. But there is another goal, which is how do we create a conversation in our community that will enable other people to join in that conversation. There is an echo about Israel, about the Israel conversation that causes many people to leave the room. Oh, they're arguing over that again. I don't want to get involved. There's no winning that argument, so why should I even go into it? Because what we are doing now is dividing us from each other and guaranteeing that the next generation of Jews will not join in altogether. And a couple of years ago during the High Holy Days, I spoke about that. Rabbi Bregman has spoken about what he experiences on the UBC campus all the time, that far from when you and I were growing up, and I just include myself in your generation generously, where Israel was the thing that brought us together, it is now very much the thing that separates on a generational divide 20-somethings, millennials, from the rest of the Jewish community. Number 2, the goal of Israel, of iEngage, is not to have anyone change their personal political positions. Our goal is to change the way that people think about their positions and the way people think about other people's positions. That our discourse should not be about military strategy, but a values conversation. Because values conversations strengthen us, and we can also see the value in someone else's position. A value conversation is more inherently a tolerant and complex one. I can accept a value as part of a larger whole without having to argue that that value itself constitutes the whole of the thing. Values can be in conflict and still be correct. It's a very important thing for us to remember, and our Jewish tradition is based upon it. Hillel and Shammai were both right when they argued in the Talmud all the time. They just had different values, and ultimately our tradition would decide the halacha, the law, will follow this value. But that's not to say that the other is any less of a value. It is a value, it just may not follow the majority in this case. Which kind of leads to the next point as well, which is that we must remind everyone that right here in our shul, when we are talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, no particular statement is going to change the reality on the ground in Israel. As I said before, we are not the Knesset, thank God. We are not the Netanyahu cabinet, and what you decide and vote upon if we were to vote is not going to suddenly become the new Temple Sholom Oslo Peace Accord or whatever it is. We have to have some humility. This is truly Torah Lishma. It's study for the sake of our own understanding. This class is not the cabinet, as I said. We are in a safe environment. All we are doing is talking. You are shaping the future of our community, not the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You're shaping that we can talk about Israel. My 4th point of 5, we must make a distinction between telling people what we think and telling people what to do. To what extent does someone outside of Israel have a right to tell someone in Israel what to do? That question came up just in our last conversation. When we talk, we are not telling Israel or Israelis what to do. It's a democracy, and democracies are messy. We are not telling them what to do. We are sharing what we think so that they can assimilate that into their own lives, and it could, if this conversation is then shared more broadly, inform their own values decision as it factors into their own voting. You can rest assured, just as in the United States and in Canada and in Israel, where democracies are living and vibrant and present, they got the leader that they wanted in that time. Whether they made a good decision about it is not for us to say one way or the other. They got who they voted for. And in Israel in particular, without commenting on the other democracies of the world, they have so many parties. It's such a that down to the minutia, I vote for only people with left hands. There's a party for left-handed people. There isn't, but there could be tomorrow. And if that's their single issue that they voted on, then they got who they wanted because of that. It's a coalition parliament, and so you're familiar with some of that in Canada also, and so it's messy and it's complicated. But they have the capacity to get out the leaders if they don't like them either.
Put them in jail.
What's that?
Put them in jail.
They can put them in jail, which is generally how they've been getting their leaders out. We are creating a space for Israelis to think about what they should do. And lastly, we do not protect Israel when we limit conversation. We actually endanger it in a very real and very hard way when we limit conversation. And that's an important point. Though we're not debating the next Oslo peace accord here and sending our votes off to the Knesset. I do believe that the reason that this is called iEngage is that when we become disengaged, we actually do a disservice to Israel. There's a Talmudic concept, I'm sure it's a legal concept as well, Dennis, that silence is assent. And if you're quiet on a subject, then it's assumed you're voting with the majority. So whether at the end of the day our positions are of the majority or the minority, and in Israel they are almost equally divided, if we say nothing, if we don't talk about it at all, then we're not at the table. And it is very clear to me that the diaspora has to be engaged with Israel, because very much for sure what Israel does in the world affects us. We see the ramifications of that in very real ways in terms of the rise of anti-Semitism around the world today. It's not fair to attach that to Israeli policy and all of those things, but it is absolutely true that we are in relationship with each other. Dennis.
It's interesting, you talk about the rise of anti-Semitism in the diaspora, and I agree, it's huge. Why is it that the rise of anti-Semitism for previous generations actually bonded Jews? Whereas what you're saying, and what the conversation has been, is that the rise of anti-Semitism is turning young Jews away.
Well, I'm not necessarily saying that the rise of anti-Semitism is turning young Jews away. Some will make the argument that Israeli policies are disconnected from the values that we raised that generation up with, that young Jewish generation that we raised on Tikkun Olam and Tzedek Tzedek Tirdov, justice, justice you shall pursue, and love the stranger. I mean, we broke our teeth on that in the 80s, in the 70s and the 80s, as we were raising many of your children through this synagogue, and we continue to do so today. And they're like, well, that's how we raised Boy Scouts, if I can use an American reference. You know, we taught our children to be Jewish is to be a mensch. Right? We taught our children to be Jewish is to be a mensch, and the millennial population sees a disconnect between the menschlichkeit that we said is what it is to be Jewish, and what they see in some Israeli policies and practices. I think that's where the disconnect is, not that anti-Semitism is dividing them. Am I somewhat informed here?
It's a question of division. It's a question of a phenomenon. Anti-Semitism in the past, whatever division, brought Jews together.
Yes.
Twice.
Right.
Okay, to deal with it. Doesn't matter what proportion.
Right.
That does not seem to be happening in this present day.
Right. I think that there's a session here that will help us understand that. And I think also that certainly pre-World War II anti-Semitism didn't have Israel as a factor, didn't have Zionism as a factor. So if you go back even to the Dreyfus Affair, from which Theodore Herzl, perhaps got his impetus, although it actually predated that, for the establishment of the State of Israel, you've now added this other complex factor, which is Zionism or anti-Israel to it, which I think some have tried to separate from anti-Semitism as its own geopolitical reason for hating not Jews, but the Jewish state.
And also that it's sort of one-time disdained and is seen by, especially the younger generation, because,
It's Goliath.
Yeah, that's Goliath.
Right. Larry.
I know it's not a philosophy course, but I just wonder if you'd clarify something for me. You talked about the common and different values. Has this values on that subject, this values, you could follow these, you could follow those. So are you suggesting as a rabbi, and for the purposes of the course, that there are no absolute values? So to be a Jew, you believe in these values. So you could have differing opinions on how to apply those values. That's one way of looking at it. Or you could say values are relativistic.
No.
Relativistic, that...
Yeah, no, so I'm not saying that at all. I think as we look at the text, this is where being a people of the book gives us, I think, a good grounding, a mooring, that Judaism very much will say, these are our values. This is a Jewish value. How you apply that and where that fits in the hierarchy of your needs in your life, that may differentiate based on your Jewish mode of practice, the practicality of that value versus your own political goals. So we're going to look at texts. We're going to look at foundational halachic Jewish texts. But we're going to look at them and we're going to say, I'm a Reformed Jew. Halakha has a vote, but not a veto in my life. So where does that fit?
But theoretically, then, could you not say these are the values that we believe in as Jews?
You could,
right?
but
and this is the conflict.
you could, but our values are often in conflict.
Okay.
So, for example, we believe in the value, just to oversimplify things,
Okay.
we believe in the value that you should love the stranger as yourself because you were once strangers in the land.
Right.
But what is the limit of that love? We also believe in the value that you shouldn't commit suicide. So is the extent of that love for the stranger in your land that you should welcome all Palestinians as full citizens of the state, even if they will outnumber you on the very day that you do that?
Good example.
So, that's what we're going to struggle with. Yes?
What is the Jewish value when it comes to dealing with anti-Semitism? Is the Jewish value to be a light of nations, do good deeds?
Mm-hmm.
What is the value when it comes to anti-Semitism?
We don't
On one
really
level,
ever
please.
speak to it.
Well, so...
That's why our kids
mhm.
are silent.
Mm-hmm. So, I think that look, I think we did this in the last iEngage. There's a classic, historic, and troubling poem by Nahum Bialik called "The City of Slaughter," and it tells the story of you can Google it, "City of Slaughter," Nahum Bialik. It tells the story of a pogrom in Russia, or Pale of Russia, someplace, and how the Orthodox men were cowering and hiding in the corner as their women were being violated. And when it was all said and done, and the blood and everything, they had gone to the rabbi, and their first question was, is my wife still permitted to me? Because she'd been violated by a Cossack or whatever it was.
No, it was in Poland right after the Second World War. Actually, I forget the name of the small town.
Right, I mean, these are stories that happen all the time, but Bialik wrote this poem.
Right. That's what the
Right,
poem is based
that's the poem's based on. And I don't think it was Second World War, it was First World War.
No, it was right after the Second World War.
I don't think so, but anyhow, the response. So one value was you don't fight back, and the rabbis seem to have actually canonized that value, going all the way back to the story of Hanukkah, because Hanukkah was a military victory, but the rabbis talk about the miracle of the oil. They didn't want us fighting back, and then you get Israel today, or Israel post World War II, post Shoah, post Holocaust. And the stories that are said on the kibbutz when the survivors of the Holocaust arrive from the DP camps and are working next to them in the fields is, why didn't you fight back? What kind of Jew are you that you didn't fight back? There were 5,000 of you getting off a train guarded by 10 guards. Why didn't you rush them? Who says they get to make the rules? That tough Israeli sabra that settled the land and dried the desert, drained the swamp. So there are competing values, and you see an arc right now of a more militant, because we've got the power and we've got the army, position that we've never had before. The rabbis made their argument about Hanukkah and the oil because we didn't have an army, and it wouldn't make any sense to argue for military fighting back if you don't have an army. They'll squash you like a bug. But we'll look at some of that also. Last point.
I'm sorry, but is there a value about caring about your relationships with a woman who has just been raped?
Yes, there's a Jewish law about it, about whether or not she needs to go to the mikveh, whether she's permissible to you to be married, because now she's been violated and hadn't been married.
Okay. I respect what you're saying.
Look, it's not my value. I just have to. It's completely tangential, but it'll end us on a happier note. I was once the chief rabbi of Visalia, California, when I was a student rabbi. Visalia is in the breadbasket of California, and I swear to God, I got this phone call one day at the synagogue. Rabbi, can I use matzah meal to make fried shrimp?
Your answer was?
My answer was, I don't know enough about. I don't know enough about the kashrut that you're trying to practice to answer that question. So my point is that people will pick and choose, and apply halakha, will apply Jewish law where it serves them, and will disregard it, and this, by the way, is true in Orthodoxy as a Reform, will disregard it where it doesn't serve them. So my interpretation of them asking that question is that, sorry?
I understand that.
Okay. Yeah. So I thank you all so much for this evening. And just to recap and make sure we're clear, you're now on unit number 1, even though this was our first class. It's the second paragraph on the syllabus. You should, at some point, not necessarily tonight, click on this link for the YouTube video. Watch I think it's 25 minutes or so, watch the first lecture. And after having watched the lecture, if you want to do the supplementary reading of the articles that are spoken about in your packet, you certainly can. Don't read the primary source text, the biblical texts. We'll do that together as a group next time. We meet again next Tuesday. Thank you all very, very much. Laila Tov.